So each chip, which is 4 by 4 millimeters, is capable of 1,000 electrodes, or has 1,000 electrodes. And we think doing up to 10 is feasible. So this is in contrast to the best FDA-approved system, which is like a Parkinson's deep brain stimulation thing, which would have on the order of 10 electrodes. So the system, even in version 1 that we're going to unveil today, is capable of 1,000 times more electrodes than the best system out there. And they're all read and write. So this is really quite, I mean, for something to be 1,000 times more than what is publicly approved is quite a big difference. And this will get better with subsequent versions. This slide may seem a little generic, because like everything's got robots, electronics, and algorithms at this point, but not threads. So the I feel like I'm in Transcendence. Actually, I was in Transcendence. So there's very tiny threads that are about a tenth, roughly, of the cross-sectional area of a human hair. So they're extremely tiny threads. In fact, the threads that we have, like I said, even in version 1, are about the same size as a neuron. So if you're going to go stick something in your brain, you want it to not be giant, you want it to be tiny, and to be approximately on par with the things that are already there, the neurons. So this is about the size of a neuron, each thread. And then you really need this to be done with a robot, because it's very tiny and it needs to be very precise. So you don't want to pierce a blood vessel. So so each thread, the robot looks sort of basically through a microscope and inserts each electrode specifically, bypassing any vasculature, any kind of like blood vessel, and making sure that it can be inserted without causing trauma, or minimal trauma. Yeah, it's not zero, but you won't notice it. That's the important part. You won't yeah, you won't feel a thing. Yeah, anyways, obviously algorithms. So just to give you a sense of scale, this is how tiny the threads are. That is not even a big finger, that is a small finger. So these threads are just like I said, way smaller than a hair, and there's 1,000 of them. And this is what the robot looks like. It's sort of quite a complex device, but it all comes down to a very tiny, tiny point. So we want to just like, you see the robot on the left, and then the what insertion next to a penny. But in fact, the actual needle that gets inserted is way, way tinier. It's that little tiny thing where the arrow is pointing. That's actually the size of the needle. It's about 24 microns in diameter. Extremely, extremely small. It's so small you can't really even see it in the picture with the penny. And then this is your brain on uranium. No, that's not really. That's agar. So you can get a sense for the robot doing the electrode insertion. That's a very zoomed-in view. So they're all very, very tiny, and the robot is very selectively applying them very delicately. And then this is what the chip looks like. action potentials. So each one of those represents one electrode. So there would be up to 10,000 of these lines. Yeah. So I guess it's always difficult to say. There's going to be there's a lot more in this presentation. So in terms of things that I think are important to bear in mind, this I think has a very good purpose, which is to cure important diseases, and ultimately to help secure humanity's future as a civilization relative to AI. The threads are very tiny, and there's a lot of them, and they're very carefully placed. And the operation on a per-chip basis, it involves just a 2 millimeter incision, which is dilated to 8 millimeters, and then the chip is placed through that, and then it goes back to being 2 millimeters, and you can basically glue it shut. You don't even need a stitch. So, and then the interface to the chip is wireless. So you have no wires poking out of your head. Very, very important. So it's basically Bluetooths to your phone. Because we'll have to watch the App Store updates for that one. Make sure we don't have a driver issue. Updating. But the key is like this is something that is going to be not stressful. Our goal is not stressful to put in. Should work well, hopefully. We'll check it out very carefully before it becomes obviously FDA approved. And it's wireless. So this I think has tremendous potential, and we hope to have this aspirationally in a human patient before the end of next year. So this is not far. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is the main purpose of this presentation is recruiting, and we need very talented people in all these areas. So it's a lot of very talented people are needed to make this ultimately successful. And then, speaking of talented people, let me hand it over to Max. Yeah.
I need the clicker. The present. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Max Hodak. I'm the president of Neuralink. I remember a couple years ago when we started talking about the idea of Neuralink and that there might be a company and whether this was even a good idea. I remember my first reaction was that I wasn't sure that this actually was a good idea, that the technology was there yet. And I think Elon has this incredible optimism where he'll pierce through these imagined constraints and show you that really a lot more is possible than you really think is today. And you have to be very careful telling him that something's impossible. It better be limited by a law of physics or you're going to end up looking stupid. And so I've wanting to build a neural interface has really been like a central goal of my life for basically as long as I can remember. I think like we talk about AI being potentially the last invention that we have. I think that a high bandwidth BMI might be like really the first invention in many ways of like the next chapter of us. It's just really, like as Elon alluded to earlier, everything about your experience, your thoughts, your memories, it's all in your brain and represented in the firing statistics of action potentials. It's a little hermetic package. When it's fully assembled, this is missing an outer mold. It's into an 8 millimeter diameter, 4 millimeter tall cylinder. And each of these has 1024 electrodes, and we can stim and record through every one of those channels. Opening it up a little bit, you can see there's the thin film, which has the threads that Elon talked about, which is the wisp going off to the side. There's a hermetic substrate, and then that gets welded later to a package that goes over top, and that's mated to our custom electronics. And we'll go into more detail. We'll have the technical leaders that work on each of these talk about these in more detail over the rest of this presentation. So yeah, I mean, this is just not to belabor the point. I know that Elon really hammered this in, but these things are very, very small. They're not. You can't manipulate these. This is one photo. This is not two photos joined together, and you really can't manipulate these with your hand. That part at the top is just a backing material that's surgical packaging. They're peeled off. The threads are peeled off that one at a time by the robot to place into the brain, and we had to build a surgical robot. And the first impetus for this is just you have to place these threads. You can't manipulate these threads. You need a robot. And then that grew into understanding where the blood vessels are and imaging into the tissue, and the surface of the brain moves because you're breathing and you have a heartbeat. And there's lots of complexity of dealing with this incredibly high entropy substrate. And it's not all offloaded to the robot. It's the robot's under the supervision of a human neurosurgeon who lays out where the threads are placed. But it would not be, the surgery is not possible without the robot. And so the N1 implant, we can place, as Elon mentioned, many of these, possibly up to 10. In one hemisphere, for our first patients, we're looking at four sensors, 3 in motor areas and 1 in a somatosensory area, which are connected via very small wires tunneled under the scalp to an inductive coil behind the ear. And that connects wirelessly through the skin to a wearable device that we call the Link, which contains a Bluetooth radio and a battery. And this is, importantly, the only battery and radio in the implant. So if you take this off, the implant shuts off. And if there's software upgrades or security issues, it's much easier to upgrade the firmware on the pod than it is to try and change the implant to configure it. And the first thing that you'll have to do is learn to use it. Like, imagine if you've never had arms, and then suddenly you have an arm, and you have to pick up a glass on the table. It's like not a cognitive task. You just, like, how do you can't think your way through that. And so it's kind of a trippy experience at the beginning where, like, patients, at first it just kind of wanders around, and then they figure out how to break the symmetry, and they learn how to control it. And that's like it's a long process. It's like learning to touch, type, or play piano. And so for the first product, we're really focusing on 3 distinct types of control. The first is giving patients the ability to control their mobile device, because we heard from over and over again from patient groups that if you have to have a caretaker around to press buttons for you, what's the point? You might as well have them do the thing. You have to get self-sufficient using the devices on your own. And then redirect the output from your phone to a keyboard or a mouse on a normal computer. It'll just show up as a Bluetooth mouse or a Bluetooth keyboard, like any keyboard or mouse that you can use on any computer. And as Elon mentioned, this is a forward-looking statement. There's a whole FDA process we have to go through. We haven't done that yet. This is like, these are aspirations. But we are working as hard as we can towards our first in-human clinical study next year. And again, these are plans, but the primary indication for that will be complete paralysis by upper cervical spinal cord injury. And we're expecting that those patients will get 4 1024 channel sensors, 1 each in primary motor cortex, supplementary motor area, and dorsal premotor cortex, which are 2 motor planning areas, and closed loop feedback into primary somatosensory cortex, which is like when you type or walk or pick up a pen, those aren't visually guided movements. Your body has all these senses of where it is in space and pressure and temperature and lots of other feedback. And we think for really high fluent control, you have to provide that back to the brain for the synthetic effectors also. And of course, fully wireless.